Hey everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. I'm Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined today by my good friend coming to us from just outside London. It is Leslie Price. She's with www.learnappeal.org.uk. Take a look at the charity. They do really good work. And in studio, we've got Harold Muliati. He is our video producer today. Our guest, Donald Clark. He's done a lot of different things, and he's got a brand new book that just came out. Here we go. This show is sponsored by Relay Corporation. Digital learning development, media development, corporate video, management consulting, and more. Visit us at www.relate.com. Thanks. And we are back, and in that center position of power, as we like to call it, it's Donald Clark. How are you, Donald?
I'm very well.
Now, I hear that you and Leslie have known each other for a good 30-something years.
Almost.
Yeah,
Almost.
That's correct. Yeah, well, we're both Scottish. If you live in England and you're Scottish, you tend to bump into other Scottish people, and you have a sort of cultural bond, I suppose.
Yep, that sounds good. So you have a new book out, just came out, Artificial Intelligence for eLearning, or for learning. That sounds really exciting, and it just came out in the States maybe a day or two ago. Came out in England probably about a couple of weeks ago. So this is fun. What made you write this book?
Well, I had been, for the last 4 to 5 years, I had been running an artificial intelligence and learning company called Wildfire that uses AI to create content, literally at the click of a button. So I had been heavily involved in this commercially, but I had been done, as usual, a lot of reading and in-depth sort of look at the research on AI and learning. And mostly blogging, to be honest. That was my primary means of communication, and lots of talks worldwide at conferences. But I was contacted by a publisher because I think AI, it's a zeitgeist term, obviously. It's a thing of the moment. In fact, there's a good reason for that, obviously, because it is the technology of the moment. If you look at the top 8 to 10 companies by market cap, a good percentage of those are really AI companies, whether it's Alphabet, Google, AI company. And if you go down the list, the 3 big Chinese companies like Baidu, Tencent are all AI companies. Facebook's an AI company. Amazon's an AI company. Microsoft's an AI company. So the very technology that is the technology of our age is found everywhere. Almost everything you do online is mediated by AI. Mm-hmm. Facebook, all social media, Amazon, Netflix, and so on. Yet, curiously, it's remarkably rare in learning. And I thought, that's the conundrum here. Why on earth, the very thing that would benefit most from personalization and smarter software is making people smarter, namely education and training. So that's what was behind the book. The idea was to not write a technical book about AI. There are plenty of those around, but a book about how AI can be used for learning, whether it's corporate learning or in higher education or schools or whatever. What are the ways in which across the learning journey, from learning engagement through learning support, the creation of content, curation, assessment, in what ways can we use this technology as a social good in a sense, or straightforwardly commercially in corporate training or in higher education? That was what lay behind the book.
That's great, because most of what you hear now about AI is, at least with e-learning, it's chatbots. That's what you hear the most about. So you can have a simulated conversation with a chatbot, and that's okay. But you don't hear much else about e-learning. So that's why I'm really interested in reading the book and finding out what else you talk about there. What's one of the coming trends in artificial intelligence and learning?
Well, that's a good point about chatbots, because sometimes the wrong things get all the publicity. Journalism likes to latch onto something that sounds interesting. Mm-hmm. And of course, chatbots have that allure of dialogue, Socratic dialogue. And they're certainly one of the more visible aspects of AI. Curiously, many of the chatbots that I've seen described as AI have no AI in them at all. They're pre-scripted or rule-based chatbots. They're actually quite difficult to build. They're expensive and long-winded to build. So there are not many really, I can give you some really brilliant examples of chatbots, but actually that's probably not the most interesting channel for AI. There are many others.
So what is the most interesting one then, Donald? What is the most interesting?
Okay. Well, behind the scenes on almost everything you do online, as I said before, whether it's Google, which is straightforward AI, that's going off and finding something for you, trying to predict what you're looking for, or you search on YouTube and find a video, it's using AI to find, using a different form of search. All of that, of course, is AI. So informal learning has been using AI for decades. That's how we find stuff on the web. And it's been incredibly powerful. What academic doesn't use Google Scholar? Then if we go up into social media, of course, all those social media searches you do in your timeline effectively is all mediated by AI. It gets a grip of what it thinks you would find interesting, and by and large that works. And then if you move into Amazon, then almost everything, the tiling on the screen is...
Yeah, we're losing you.
It's frozen up with me.
Yep. Was there a storm where he was too?
Don't know. I don't know. The storm here has gone.
Donald, we've lost you. Audio's not coming in. Can you call him back? We will call you right back. We've had great connection, of course, until the show starts. That happens. It's live.
Yeah, but, when you've got, I say, the storms we've got here, I can't remember what they've called it, the latest one, but we've got big storms, and, I mean, the village where I live is flooded.
Wow. You want to try him again?
Let's see, I'm trying him. He's not. Let's see. All right, let me...
What happens? Yeah, what happens during live broadcasting sometimes, everything goes well, and sometimes you go live, and next thing you know, you lose someone. It happens, especially when there's weather going around, and I know there's hurricanes in our.
There, he's back. Yeah. He's back.
There you go. We lost you for a second.
You did, yeah. So I go back to a cut point and start again, or do you want to ask another question?
Well,
no, go for it, Donald.
Yeah, what happened is you got cut off right when you were giving your answer as to what was the most important thing or the current thing everybody's talking about or could be done with.
Particularly in learning.
Well, so so if we turn to learning very specifically, I've talked about the invisible hand of AI being behind many of the things you use in informal learning. But of course, AI is also being used in Angular in formal learning as well. So I'll give you one example, and that's on adaptive learning. And I've been involved in that for 4 to 5 years on big studies with big numbers of learners. And the proposition there is quite simple. There's a good analogy, and that is the sat-nav or GPS in your car. So if you're driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles and you take the wrong turning, your sat-nav or GPS will get you back on course. And that's what adaptive learning does. A very clever bit of triangulation, as it were, or data-driven, aggregated data as well as personalized data, gets you back literally on course in mathematics or biology or American history. And we've done a whole rack of courses, and the research coming out the far end is amazing. The kids, students love it. And then beyond that, of course, you get a dogleg and attainment. These are all 101 courses in college. So they're incredibly powerful because they prevent kids from dropping out of college. That's when the danger zone is. So we've not only been using AI in Angular, we've been getting proof and research that it works.
What kind of age group, though, Donald? The reason I ask is that, as you know, I mean, you've met my son and my daughter, and they distinctly remember you from the retirement do. And my daughter, I think, was actually chatting to you at the time, And when I said you were coming on the show tonight, she's a primary school teacher. She teaches 7-year-olds, so year 3. And she was saying, oh, is that kind of thing then suitable for 7-year-olds? Is there anything around because now that schools are going back, they're actually going to be very limited with resources that they can use.
Well, yes, I mean, the proposition, this is just a piece of technology that underlies or will underlie almost everything we do, I think, in online learning in the future. But if you start right at the bottom of that age group, then one of the things about online learning is it's incredibly text-driven. You know, people are expected to type stuff in, for example, but that's unrealistic with young children who have yet to write or type. So let me give you a good example there. I have right next to me here an Amazon Alexa. We have one in every room, and that's linked up to my television, my music, my robot vacuum cleaner. I can ask it any sort of question at any time. And the use of voice, for example, has been enabled by AI. So, it not only recognizes your voice and turns it into text for analysis, it also, the voice I hear from Alexa is coming from a piece of text effectively, which speaks to me. So if you're going to engage young children with online learning, you have to use voice as an interface. Now, this is an area that people are almost forgotten about, but interfaces have been revolutionized by AI. There is no doubt about that. And voice is a very, very clear example. But we also have on newer Pixel phones from Google, for example, which are little pocket-sized demons in your pocket that are just full of AI, have gesture recognition, and that's AI as well. So if I put my hand near my Pixel phone, it knows my hand's coming towards it, and as I turn it, it recognizes face recognition, AI again for ID. So the whole thing, my phone actually knows its environment. It's got radar or LiDAR in it that literally knows what surrounds it. So that's another form of interface. And then I can use gestures, just swipe my hand to get music back and forth, close my fingers for button press and so on. So all sorts of wonderful interface. I've got a whole chapter in my book about this, how interfaces are and will continue to be revolutionized with AI.
That's really interesting. It's also very interesting because I know, you've recently got your dog, Doug, isn't it? Your dog. And my kids, my daughter has got a dog. Yeah, there is Doug. My daughter's also got a dog, and my daughter is using very similar hand signals with the dog as she is with her 9-10-month-old baby. So she's using the leave it, don't touch, come here, all the different hand gestures and words that she's saying, she's using with the dog exactly the same as she's using with her 9-10-month-old child.
In a couple of months, the dog will be telling the kid, fetch me a bone.
But I just know it's just what Donald was saying to do with the phones and the gestures and everything. It suddenly opens up a whole new landscape, doesn't it, Donald?
Well, in learning, there's a very important thing that we seem to have forgotten here, and that is that most learning takes place through voice. Most teachers speak to the people, whether you're an academic in faculty or you're a teacher in a school. Almost all engagement with your learners is through voice. And online learning, of course, was just limited by the technology we had, which was screens and keyboards or touchscreen. We now have the ability to speak and bring back a sort of the Socratic method in learning was really crushed by the blackboard. That was the moment when teachers turned their back on audiences and started writing things and not speaking to them. But we have a chance here of reintroducing voice. And indeed, in another area of AI in learning, that's the creation of content through this tool called Wildfire. That was one of our goals. So we can do a a corporate learning program or an educational program, and you can actually speak your answers. So it can ask you a question, and you can actually give the answer. And we've been doing this in medical education, and even quite complicated vocabulary. Often 4, 5, 6 syllable words like meningitis or whatever can be readily recognized by very straightforward software these days. Now that's a great breakthrough because we can start speaking to the e-learning, if you want to see it. It's a much more natural form of interface. So I think voice will have a huge role to play in e-learning going forward.
Now, we noticed one thing. We have an Alexa in the office, and we always have fun. I have one at home, too. And I like Alexa. I think that's probably the best of all of them right now. I think it's better than Siri, and the Google one is pretty good on the phone. But Alexa's interesting because she can go from brilliant to one of the dumbest things ever put on the earth. And you just go, how do they do this? And every so often, if you ask something it doesn't like, it just goes, dodong. It just makes this little dodong sound, and it goes, okay, didn't like that one. But it's interesting how some things it picks up instantly and others, not a clue, even though it's related to what you just asked.
Yeah. Well, that's right. There's sometimes a misapprehension or the anthropomorphization of artificial intelligence. And whenever I give a talk on AI these days, I start by calming people down by saying, and this is a line from Daniel Dennett, the philosopher, which is, AI is basically competence without comprehension. It will beat you at chess, it will beat you at poker, it will beat you at Go, it will beat you at Jeopardy, but it doesn't know it's won. There's no consciousness in there. It's just maths. It's just software, artificial intelligence. The phrase, I like to drop the word intelligence, actually, because another useful way of seeing AI for people involved in the learning game is as an idiot savant. So it's profoundly clever at very precise things. So it will beat you at chess. But it's profoundly stupid, at the same time. Hence your observation that Alexa makes mistakes. So as long as we choose AI for very specific precision tasks, like the creation of content, which I do, or recognition of voice and so on, then we can get somewhere. If we imagine that robot teachers, at DevLearn last year, they had this really weird thing, which is Sophie, a robot, which they put on the stage. You have to roll it in on wheels, for God's sake. That's how bad it was. And then you have this stilted conversation with Sophie, which is really, as you rightly described there, Rick, which is a bad chatbot in a piece of plastic. That's what it was. This is not the way to go with the AI and learning. It's the very opposite. Robot teachers are a fallacy because a teacher has general intelligence, flexible, adaptable. It's not a precision tool. So we shouldn't be pretending that we're going to have robot teachers. We should be getting down to the nuts and bolts of using it for engagement or learner support and domain-specific chatbots, for example, who were mentioned earlier, the creation of content or ideas that are described on assessments, on online assessments, or adaptive learning where you're vectoring people through courses, being guided by an AI tutor, which is using a huge amount of data, either aggregated from previous students or data it knows about you as a precision task on you as a learner. So there are many precision, low-hanging fruit tasks in learning, as opposed to this robot teacher, a chatbot that will answer any question you ever throw at it. That's out there somewhat. Some of this will come, but let's be realistic and use the stuff that's here and now.
So what do you see in it? Do you see then I know when my daughter is doing teaching, and certainly when I was involved in further education, I had a plan in my head as a teacher when I went in, even teaching quite difficult, complicated subjects, like business entrepreneurship and all the different stuff around marketing and economics, which was actually quite difficult for students to take on board. A lot of them, would be, you'd put them in groups to do stuff. And as a teacher, you're then tasked with going around every individual group. And one of the groups, would have their hand up like for 10 minutes before you managed to get to them because it took you 10 minutes to explain something. So do you see AI being able to be used in that kind of environment? So if the students are working in groups and they are struggling with a topic, that they'd actually be able to ask a question and get maybe not the perfect answer, but get some kind of answer.
Yeah, we use the future tense there, Leslie, but this is happening now. It's the present tense issue. So let me explain how some of that works.
Oh, okay.
So if we focus on the word feedback for a minute, so the problem with teaching, and I've taught 16-year-old boys maths, I've taught in universities, is you really have no idea what's going on in the heads of 100 people in a lecture hall or even 30 kids in a classroom. You can't do the cognitive diagnosis and therefore give feedback. Now, feedback is a powerful thing in learning. The research is really clear on this. It propels the learner forward. It gives them motivation. It helps them proceed at the right pace. Now, the problem with the human teacher is humans are obviously non-scalable, but supposing I can capture those feedback mechanisms that good teachers have, build it into the AI recommendation engine, so that at every moment as you go through a course or a learning task, it's keeping an eye on you. And it's drawing on all this past experience of every other student who's ever taken that course and what difficulties they get into. And it knows a bit about you. So at that very moment, and you ask it something, it brings all that experience to bear and gives you a recommendation or resequences the content in such a way that it suits you as an individual. Leslie, Donald, Drake, Harold. You know, each of us would get vector through the course differently. Now, that you can never really do that in a classroom successfully. It's very slow. But you can scale this to the thousands, tens of thousands, millions on AI, because and another really important feature of AI as a sort of intelligent tutor, and I've seen this work because, in fact, the company I was involved in, I invested several times in this company. It was so successful that the university that used it for the students have just bought the company. So this is almost unknown in higher education that you should make a move like that, but they put in a big 7-figure sum as an investment and on they go. So this stuff is working. So that, it's not future tense this. We really have examples in China. They're doing this on a massive scale. So you have companies there who are, looking at tens and hundreds of thousands of students and applying adaptive learning techniques, Bayesian prediction principles, all that technical stuff. Don't worry about that. But it works, and it works pretty well for the basic courses. The sort of 101 college courses, school courses. As soon as you get into the higher end, maybe second, third, fourth year in a degree course, it's far more complex, critical thinking. And I wouldn't necessarily say that software is good enough in that context.
But therefore, it would work. So if somebody is starting, so you've got induction within a company and processes and systems and procedures and all of these things in an organization, then you could actually use AI to help people through that induction process.
Well, that's right. Traditionally, e-learning, all forms of learning are one size fits all, whether it's in a classroom, the lecture hall, or in a corporate environment. But of course, induction is a good example, or onboarding. When you get employees onboarding, they join at different times and they all have different needs. A heavyweight coder will have a very different needs from a salesperson joining an organization. So you should have an adaptive course that does that. I think to switch to another radically different thing, because it's something that really fascinates me and we've been quite reasonably successful at this, AI can also create things. So we've been delivering a lot of courses in lots of different domains where the AI has created the online learning without the need of an instructional designer. Now, this may seem quite radical, but it does several things. If you send me a document or a PowerPoint or a video, and companies have huge mother loads of documents, PowerPoints, and videos. Every organization I know has, a tsunami of this stuff. And of course, the trick is to get that knowledge into the heads of your employees. So what we do is we take that stuff, whether it's a document, PowerPoint, or video, and we can use AI to précis or shorten or contract the content. There are two methods of doing that, abstractive and extractive. So you can keep the original wording if your regulators in a pharmaceutical company need the exact wording, but just shrink it down from 20,000 words to 2,000 words or 200 words. Or abstractive is précising the content. But we can do some wonderful things here. For example, with a video, the AI can grab the narration or the voiceover in the video, It can then look for the learning points and create the interaction automatically. It can also, we've done something quite neat, I think. As you know, most e-learning is text, graphics, video, animation, and peppered with multiple choice questions. The multiple choice question is the dominant form of interaction, sadly, I think, because that's all we could do in online learning. But we can now take artificial intelligence and allow you to type in full sentences and short answers. And so if I asked you a question, what does the phrase artificial intelligence really mean to you? I can interpret your answer because I can use AI to semantically interpret and understand your written text. And we've been doing that in e-learning for a number of years now. And it works really beautifully well because there's a really nice book I highly recommend called Make It Stick. It was published some time ago. But this shows that actually good learning involves engagement, but it involves cognitive effort. Effortful learning. Now, just simply clicking on the next button or an option in 3 or 4 options on a multiple choice question isn't as cognitively deep as you might imagine. The real trick is to get some deep processing in your brain, recall the answer. So if I asked you a question like, what is the capital of Scotland, where both myself and Leslie come from, I wouldn't give you the option Edinburgh, Glasgow, or Dundee, because the answer's there already. You've got a 33% chance of getting it right anyway. I would just leave you, and then you would go into your brain and go, what is it? What are they saying? Oh, yeah, there's Edinburgh, Glasgow. In other words, you're doing that deep processing, and the act of recalling the answer, then typing it in, are 2 cognitive acts that really reinforce the point. The research is very interesting here. The actual recall of the answer is more powerful than the original presentation or teaching of it. It's slightly counterintuitive here, but actually the rehearsal and recall into your own brain, when you're sitting there and thinking through something, that's a very powerful reinforcement event. It means you'll remember it further down the line with more depth. So we've been doing all sorts of things in terms of the creation of content, on all, everything from aircraft engineers, quite complex software training, booking systems in airlines, right through to the values of companies, and then a whole load of middle ground on medical training. We can take a medical academic paper from a journal and literally put it through the AI engine, and it will produce an e-learning program that asks you the need-to-know stuff. What was the author? When was it published? What were the goals? How many people were in the trial? What was the conclusion, and what were the side effects? Nobody ever reads a whole medical paper or remembers a whole medical paper. They only need to know about 7 or 8 things. So the AI can abstract that stuff, also test you, and then when you ask you the questions, they can interpret your answers. We also put little podcasts on at the beginning of the training programs, which have text to speech, which is done by AI. So all of these little AI techniques can be used to create and bring e-learning to life in a way. I think, in a sense, we've been on a treadmill here of media presentation, just more video, graphics, animation, in the hope that media rich is mind rich. In actual fact, media rich is not mind rich. Less is more very often in learning. You don't want to over-engineer and over-egg things.
So how do you think things are going to change then, Donald? Do you think more companies are actually going to go for AI? Do you think there will be a step change?
Well, of course, the rate of change is the difficult thing because people are always there's all sorts of cultural resistance to this. But remember, the change has already happened. There isn't a learner on the planet that doesn't use Google or search. So they've been using AI for 20 years. But, I think social media is actually a great learning tool. I use Twitter a lot because it's a form of space practice almost. I'm always rehearsing my thoughts. I get feedback. I go back and look at notifications. I think learners have unwittingly been using the invisible hand of AI for a long, long time. And what we're seeing is a bigger emphasis with newer systems like LXP systems, nudging, pulling, pushing. That's all using AI as well. So you're already seeing a shift in the corporate training market away from the standard LMS, do this course, did you complete the course, did you get the pass mark, towards learning in the workflow, all that jazz that people have been talking about for a long time but have never had the technology to do. Along comes this amazing piece of technology where you're harvesting data, acting on that data, and really are understanding where somebody is in their job. Like my Pixel phone, you know roughly that they may be on this project. what their job role is, what they're likely to need at that particular time. And you can deliver stuff to them, nudge learning, or you can allow them to pool. And because you know when and who they are, the stuff you provide on the pool or the search, of course, driven by AI, can be that much more relevant to them. So we're already seeing the LXP market explode. I've been involved with a company called Learning Pool, who were an LMS content vendor, and we've just gone through this amazing growth spurt because we built some AI technology around LXPs, and we built a thing called Learning Locker, which is a repository for data, which is open source if anybody's interested in using that. So all of this stuff's starting to coalesce.
That came from Ben Betts's company, didn't it? HT2, when they then moved to Learning Pool.
That's right. We acquired Ben's company, and then we folded it into the LXP technology we had. But that's a good example of how a major shift in a market is already happening. And you'll see other companies like Learning Pool emerge in the marketplace and grow quite quickly because it's so powerful, this stuff. But of course, we haven't addressed another issue here, which is the data issue. One of the things that is changing is this awareness of the use of data in learning, and people are still getting to grips with this. One of the things I dislike about data, the use of data currently, is it always ends up in dashboards. It's a bit like going out to a car dealer and just buying the dashboard, without buying the car. People are obsessed by that, and people sitting staring at these donuts, on the screen, and of course, not the point is not to stare at dashboards. The point is to do something. If my car's running out of fuel, I go to the garage and get fuel. That's what the dashboard's for. But so many people are just investing so much of their time on dashboards. But it's difficult because this is where the AI comes in. AI works on data. Now, there are 4 levels of data, really. You can have descriptive data, what learners have done, describing what they've done. And that's useful because you can make decisions on, how long they watched a piece of video, scores they got, and so on. But it gets far more interesting when you do analysis on the data, level 2. And I was, what was the mean or median values of that group of people in relation to that content? And that's a deep analysis. But then it gets really interesting when you use the data to predict the future. And that's exactly what Google does. It's trying to predict exactly what you want. That's what Amazon is doing. It's trying to predict what you may want to buy. It's what Netflix does. It's trying to predict what you want to watch next. And that's what learning should be. It should be trying to predict what you need next in your learning journey. So I think that third level, predictive recommendation engines, this is going to be big. That's what adaptive learning is all about. And then another one, which is often forgotten, is prescription, actually prescribing the future. So you're using the data to actually do things for real, and that's what these LXP systems do. If they feel you need a nudge on a space practice pattern, so we know that hardly anybody learns anything with one bite of the cherry. How do you get several bites of the cherry in a logarithmic pattern so it gets shunted from short to long-term memory? Well, you can build space practice into the algorithm and feed it with data about when. This is what Duolingo does, for example, very successfully. It's got 50 times its revenues of its nearest competitor. Literally tens of millions of people learning languages and damn thing. And that's because it's using clever space practice technique. If you go away from the system and come back, then it knows you've been away for a week and knows you will have forgotten stuff. So it'll take you back on the learning journey. This is smart. This is how the brain works. This is science. Now, you can cleverly build pedagogy into AI, I think. That's what this is about. The invisible hand will have baked pedagogy into the algorithms and use data to improve. Remember, machine learning means that when you use these systems, the more people who use them, or the more you use them, the better they get. They are actually learners, funnily enough. The new landscape is not just teachers and learners. There are teachers, learners, and software in the middle is also that mediates this, that's also learning. So that's the brave new world.
Is Duolingo the company out of Spain?
No, Duolingo was originally out of Carnegie Mellon. So there was a very smart, it was a very smart AI guy there who he invented CAPTCHA, those little things where you type in odd-shaped letters and numbers. Well, he invented that. He's a really innovative guy. And I've written a blog on this if you're interested, because there are several features of Duolingo that are really, if you're interested in AI and learning, what I tried to do is is extract the really interesting bits that are driven by AI to inform how we may apply it in corporate learning or in higher education or whatever. I'll give you a good and simple example. On Duolingo, one of the big problems with learning a language is you sort of fall off. You eventually run out of steam or motivation.
Yeah.
And what they do is very cleverly, if they feel that you've been off the system and they get a sniff of you losing motivation, they send you what's called the guilt notification. And it's like a final warning. It makes you feel guilty about dropping out. It's very cleverly worded, actually. Yeah. And it works like a dream. You know, you just make people feel guilty. Well, you've come this far. Why give up now, sort of thing? You know, because learning a language is such a horrifically difficult thing to do as an adult. And it's all about perseverance. So the system jolts you along, as it were, very, very cleverly, I think, you know, as well as the adaptive techniques behind the scenes, of course.
That's interesting. That sounds good. Very good. Well, we are, believe it or not, out of time. That was really.
That's 30 minutes gone. It goes so quickly, Donald.
It goes very quickly, and that was really good information. I'll be buying your book later on today.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
You did say that you would pass. So people who are watching the show or who look at stuff, you said that, you know, people could maybe get a discount.
Yes, that's right. If you, what I'll do is give you the discount separately, because I think the publisher doesn't want the discount published just on YouTube generally. But for anybody who contacts you or contacts me on LinkedIn or Twitter, I will. What I've been doing is personally giving them a discount, and you go to the publisher's website and you get 20% off and free delivery in the US and UK.
Oh, great! That sounds good. Is it also available on Kindle?
That's fantastic.
Yes, it's available on Kindle as well. It's on Amazon. You get the ebook versions as well.
Yes, wonderful. That sounds really good. Well, we really appreciate you coming on, sharing your knowledge and experience. And this is something new for a lot of people. So this is actually very helpful. I remember doing, I'll go back in time, back in the early 70s, I was learning AI programming with languages like Forth, Lisp. That was a long time ago. And it was fun. But it was very, very primitive at that time. It just couldn't do that much yet.
We have a similar background, Rick. In the 70s. When I was 19. I went to the US to study at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire.
Yep.
And Dartmouth was unusual because that's where the modern era of AI started. The first big conference there by McCarthy was in 1956, the year of my birth. Curiously, the year in which Elvis was launched in the world. Yeah. But I also did that's where I picked up early programming techniques. Also, they had a big mainframe on the campus, you know, that early stuff with cards and stuff.
That was
I like you, I did all that stuff at that age, and it was great. It was a formative experience for me, you know, and this AI thing has stuck with me since then.
Well, didn't Dartmouth also create BASIC? I thought they created the BASIC language.
That's correct. That's right. Yep. BASIC was invented there as well, and there are all sorts of. You know, it's like we talked about Carnegie Mellon and so on. There are all sorts of very interesting, if you do a root analysis of where all this stuff came from, you know, they go back to really interesting research and really interesting places.
Well, you probably remember then, I'm 54, so I was a couple of years younger, older. But there was a tool called ELIZA. ELIZA was one of the first AI things put out there. It wasn't really that much AI. It was just a lot of pattern matching, and it was simple. And yet it was a pretty fun tool, and people loved playing on that thing and just trying to figure out, because it basically was a psychologist analyzing you, Freudian psychologist, I think. It was fun.
Well, I remember ELIZA was really interesting because it was written by Weizenbaum. The guy who wrote it hated psychotherapy, and he wrote it as a joke because he thought he could expose psychotherapy as a fraud. Basically, they just ask these questions and they pattern match. You know?
He wasn't far from reality.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's as usual, grain of truth in all of this. And of course, what happened was his secretary, she didn't know he had written it, and she thought it was a real person. So suddenly, and then there was a very interesting set of research by Nassim Reeves called The Media Equation, another great book. And they proved that we as humans are incredibly gullible. It's so easy to fool us into thinking that something's human when it's not. And this is the essence of modern chatbots or Alexa, you know. We anthropomorphize at the drop of a hat. And so a lot of chatbots rely on this. And that's good because, you know, it makes them work. And
Right.
ELIZA was the first, and there have been many since, but chatbots are that much more sophisticated now, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, there was a great
Anyway,
example.
we're now running over. So I'm
Right,
just very conscious of time.
All right.
as Scots know how to blether, Rick. Now you know.
Oh, I could go on forever. Yeah. And I'm not Scottish. But anyway, Donald, a real pleasure meeting you and sharing some of this. And if you want to get a hold of Donald, we'll have his LinkedIn info below. And we'll have a link to his book as well. Have a good one, everyone. We will see you next week on eLearnChat. Thanks again, Donald.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very
Bye.
much, Rick.
Thanks, Donald.
Pleasure.